Felix brought the axe down with a satisfying crack, splitting the blue bark log cleanly in two. Sweat ran down his massive frame despite the cool morning air of Arden's endless forest. He paused, wiping his brow with the back of his hand, listening to the alien bird song that had become his only companion over the past 3 years. The former colonial marine had chosen this remote world precisely for its emptiness, its distance from the crushing crowds of Earth and the endless political games that had left him hollow inside. Here on this frontier planet with its violet sky and strange flora, he had found something resembling peace. His flannel shirt, faded from countless washings, stretched across shoulders broad enough to intimidate even the largest predators this world had to offer. His heavy work pants were tucked into worn boots, and his calloused hands gripped the axe handle with the easy confidence of a man who had spent years mastering his craft. The cabin behind him was simple but sturdy, built from the same blue bark trees he now chopped for firewood. Smoke curled lazily from the stone chimney. Felix had constructed everything himself, using only hand tools and his own strength. No power tools, no modern conveniences beyond a few basic items he had hauled up here on his back. Just him, the forest, and the rhythmic swing of his axe. It was all he wanted, all he needed. A branch snapped somewhere in the dense undergrowth. Felix's head jerked up, his grip on the axe shifting instantly from woodsman to warrior. 3 years of solitude had not dulled the combat instincts honed over a decade of service. His eyes scanned the fern-covered forest floor, searching for movement. The morning sounds had stopped. Even the alien birds had gone silent. "Show yourself!" Felix called out, his voice deep and commanding. He raised the axe slightly, ready to swing or throw, depending on what emerged from those shadows. The ferns rustled and 2 small figures stumbled into the clearing. They moved like wounded animals, hunched and fearful, their eyes darting around as if expecting danger from every shadow. Felix stared. They were children, or at least child-sized beings. Their skin was a pale blue, almost luminescent in the dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy, with undertones of silver that seemed to shimmer with each labored breath. Silver hair fell in tangled waves around delicate faces with eyes too large and too knowing for their apparent age. Those eyes were a startling amber color, almost golden, and they watched him with a mixture of desperate hope and primal fear. They wore simple dresses that had once been white, but were now torn and stained with mud, moss, and what looked like blood. Dark blue blood. One of them had a fresh scratch across her cheek, the wound-weeping blue fluid that contrasted starkly with her pale skin. Both children were breathing hard, their small chests heaving. Their bare feet were cut and bleeding from running through the forest without shoes. The taller one clutched her sister's hand so tightly her knuckles had turned pale. "Please," the taller one whispered, her voice trembling but determined. "Please help us. They are coming." Felix's military instincts kicked in immediately. He scanned the tree line behind them, looking for pursuit. Who is coming? How many? How far back? The smaller girl flinched at the rapid questions, but the taller one straightened slightly, recognizing the tone of a soldier assessing a threat. "The collectors. We heard them maybe a mile back. They have hounds, the striped kind that can track for days." Felix cursed under his breath. Tracking hounds meant these children had been running for a while, and their pursuers would not give up easily. "How long have you been running?" "Since yesterday morning," the taller girl said. "We have not stopped except to hide when we heard them getting too close." Felix lowered the axe slowly but did not release it. His eyes took in every detail, the exhaustion in their posture, the genuine terror in their eyes. The fact that despite being clearly terrified of him, they had approached anyway. That took courage, or desperation. "Ardenites," he muttered. He had seen their kind before, in the distant settlement to the south, where he occasionally traded furs for supplies. These were native to this world, their people having colonized Arden long before humans arrived. The settlement elder had mentioned that Ardenites aged differently than humans, reaching maturity slower. These two could be anywhere from 8 to 12 in human equivalent years. "What are you doing out here? Where are your parents?" The 2 girls exchanged a glance, and Felix saw something pass between them. Twin telepathy, some called it. though he suspected it was just the deep bond that came from sharing a womb in every moment since. The shorter one stepped forward first, her small hands clasped together. Her voice was barely above a whisper. They took them. They took everyone in our village, everyone except us. We were out gathering flowers for the festival, the taller girl added, her voice stronger now as if saying it out loud made it more real. We heard screaming and hid in the root cellar under the elder's house. When we came out, everyone was gone. There was blood, and these. She held out her hand, revealing a handful of black feathers. The collectors leave these as markers. Felix had seen those feathers before, nailed to trees in remote areas. He had assumed they were some kind of territorial marking by local wildlife. Now he understood they were something far more sinister. Calling cards left by slavers. Who took them? The collectors, the taller girl said, and fear made her voice crack. She took a shuddering breath and continued. They come in the night with their beasts and their nets. They take our people to the processing centers. We never see them again. Her name, Felix would learn, was Clele. Her sister was Dorothy. Dorothy stepped forward, her golden eyes meeting his with startling directness. Our grandmother told us before she died that if we were ever in terrible danger, we should find the big human who lives alone in the deep forest. She said you were a warrior once, and warriors have honor even when they try to hide from it. Felix felt his jaw tighten. So much for anonymity. He should have known that in a community as tight-knit as the Ardenites, everyone knew everyone else's business, and the strange human hermit would definitely be talked about. Your grandmother was mistaken. I was a warrior. Past tense. I am done with all that. Felix felt his jaw tighten. He had heard rumors about collectors during his infrequent trips to trade, mercenaries who hunted Ardenites for some corporate interest. He had dismissed them as frontier paranoia, the kind of conspiracy theories that sprouted in isolated communities. Looking at these terrified children, he realized the rumors had been true. There's a settlement south of here, Felix said, pointing with his axe. 3 days' walk if you follow the river. They'll help you there. No, Clele said urgently. We can't go there. They'll find us. They have people everywhere. Dorothy nodded vigorously. They want us specifically. Our blood is special. Felix sighed, running a hand through his hair. This was not his problem. He had left civilization specifically to avoid problems, to avoid responsibility for anyone other than himself. Look, kids, I'm not running a charity here. I came to this world to be alone. Please, Dorothy said again, and tears began rolling down her blue cheeks. They'll kill us. They need our blood to make medicine for rich people on other worlds. But taking it kills us. The axe suddenly felt heavy in Felix's hand. He had seen terrible things during his service. Civilian massacres, orbital bombardments, entire colonies wiped out for strategic advantage. He had thought he was done with that world, done with having to care about injustice and cruelty. But these were children, terrified, hunted children. Come inside, he heard himself say. I'll give you something to eat and then we'll figure this out. The relief on their faces was immediate. They followed him into the cabin, staying close together like frightened animals. Felix rummaged through his supplies, finding some dried meat and fruit. He set it on the rough wooden table and watched as they ate with the desperate hunger of those who had been running for days. That was when he heard it, a low thrumming sound, growing louder. Felix's blood ran cold. He recognized that sound from his military days. Mounted cavalry, the kind used for rapid patrol through rough terrain. Clele's eyes went wide with terror. They found us, she whispered. Felix moved quickly to the window. Through the trees, he could see movement. Riders on massive, six-legged beasts called striders, their blue fur bristling as they crashed through the underbrush. He counted at least 6 riders, all armed with bows and blades, professional hunters. The peaceful life was over. Felix strode to the fireplace and reached above the mantel, pulling down the weapons he had hoped never to use again, a heavy war bow, crafted from laminated Ardanian hardwood, a quiver of steel-tipped arrows, a long knife that was almost a short sword, and his axe, always his axe. Listen to me, he said to the girls, his voice calm, despite the adrenaline starting to pump through his veins. Do exactly as I say, and we might survive this. Can you do that? Both girls nodded solemnly. Good. They could follow orders. That might save their lives. He led them to his bed, a simple wooden frame he had constructed from local timber, and pulled it aside with one hand. The hidden trapdoor beneath was invisible until you knew where to look. Its edges fitted so precisely into the floorboards that no gap showed. Dorothy gasped when she saw it. The tunnel beneath was narrow and dark, barely wide enough for Felix's massive shoulders. He had dug it himself over the course of a month, working in secret at night, driven by the paranoid certainty that eventually something would find him here. It was an emergency escape route, something his military training had insisted he build, despite thinking he would never need it. The tunnel smelled of earth and moisture. It stretched into darkness, supported by crude timber beams that Felix had scavenged from fallen trees. He had lined the floor with flat stones to prevent it from becoming a mud trap during the rainy season. It was not comfortable, but it would do its job. Follow this tunnel, Felix said, lighting a small lantern and handing it to Clelly. It goes north for about half a mile, then opens into a cave system. The main chamber has a pool fed by an underground spring. You will know it because the rocks around it glow green from the moss. Wait for me there. Do not leave the cave no matter what you hear. Understand? What about you? Clelly asked, and Felix saw her hand tighten on her sister's. These girls had already lost everyone. The thought of losing their one hope of protection clearly terrified them. I am going to slow them down. He softened his voice slightly. I promise I will come for you, but I need you to be brave and do exactly as I said. Can you be brave? Dorothy nodded first, then Clelly. Felix helped them down into the tunnel, watching as they disappeared into the darkness, with their small lantern casting dancing shadows on the earthen walls. For a moment he considered going with them, abandoning the cabin and just running. But he knew these collectors would pursue. Better to give them a reason to stop here, to think they had their quarry cornered. Before they could protest further, he replaced the trapdoor and moved the bed back into position. Then he took up his bow and moved to the window. Through the gaps in the wooden shutters, he could see the riders had stopped at the edge of the clearing. They were professionals, not rushing in blindly like bandits or raiders would. They would send scouts first, try to assess the situation, look for traps. Felix had planned for this. Not for this specific scenario, but he had lived in enough war zones to know that eventually, trouble found everyone. Peace was temporary. Violence was a constant, lurking at the edges of civilization waiting for its moment. Around his property, hidden in the underbrush and carefully camouflaged with moss and fallen leaves, were tripwires connected to simple but effective traps, sharpened stakes hidden in concealed pits, deadfalls suspended between trees, snares that could catch a man's leg and yank him into the air. Primitive but deadly, and most importantly, silent until they were triggered. No energy signatures to detect, no mechanical parts to spot with scanners, just wood and rope and physics. The first rider urged his strider forward. The beast was magnificent, its blue fur rippling over powerful muscles as it moved. Each of its 6 legs ended in padded feet that could grip almost any terrain. The rider held a bow, arrow already nocked, his posture suggesting years of training and experience. Felix could see the cold professionalism in his movements, the way his eyes swept the clearing looking for threats, the deliberate pace of his advance. This was no amateur. This was a hunter who had tracked prey across hostile terrain many times before. The strider's front right leg hit the first tripwire, a length of tough vines stretched taut between 2 concealed stakes. The deadfall released with a wooden groan that seemed impossibly loud in the morning stillness. A massive log, as thick around as Felix's torso and studded with sharpened branches like the spines of some enormous porcupine, swung down from where it had been suspended between 2 trees. It was crude but effective, thousands of pounds of hardwood accelerating under the force of gravity. The rider barely had time to shout a warning before the log smashed into him and his mount with devastating force that cracked bones and sent them both tumbling across the clearing. The strider's scream was a terrible sound, almost human in its agony. The rider did not scream at all. He did not have the chance. The other riders scattered, but Felix was already moving. He burst from the cabin's back door, bow in hand, and sprinted for the tree line. Behind him, he heard angry shouts. An arrow hissed past his head, close enough that he felt the wind of its passage. He dove behind a massive blue-bark tree, just as two more arrows thudded into the trunk where he had been standing. Felix knocked his own arrow, took a breath to steady himself, and leaned around the tree. The riders were regrouping, trying to identify his position. He picked his target, drew the heavy war bow back to his ear, and released. The arrow flew true. It caught one of the riders in the shoulder, punching through leather armor and sending him toppling from his saddle. Before the others could react, Felix had another arrow knocked. This one took a strider in the eye, and the beast went down thrashing. But he was outnumbered, and they knew it. Two riders split off, circling to flank him. Felix cursed and ran deeper into the forest, using the terrain he knew better than anyone. Behind him, he heard the crash of pursuit. He led them toward another trap, a concealed pit covered with branches and leaves. At the last second, Felix leaped over it, his long legs carrying him clear. The first rider following him was not so lucky. The strider's weight crashed through the false floor, and both mount and rider plunged into the pit where sharpened stakes waited below. The screams were mercifully brief, but now Felix had lost track of time. He needed to get to the girls, make sure they had made it to the caves. He turned north, running through the forest with the ease of long practice. Arrows flew around him, some so close he felt them tug at his clothes. The forest suddenly opened up into a rocky gorge. Felix scrambled down the steep slope, loose stones cascading around him. At the bottom, he could see the dark mouth of the cave system. He was almost there. An arrow slammed into the rock next to his head, showering him with stone chips. Felix spun, bringing his bow up. Three riders had reached the top of the gorge, their striders picking their way carefully down the slope. They had him cornered, or so they thought. Felix deliberately placed himself between the riders and the cave entrance. If they wanted the girls, they would have to go through him. He drew his bow, the heavy laminated wood creaking with tension, and waited. The lead rider was a woman with scars across her blue face and cold eyes. She held up a hand, stopping her companions. "Human!" she called out. "This doesn't concern you. Give us the children, and you can go back to your trees." "No," Felix said simply. She smiled without humor. "They told us you were stubborn." "Very well." The three riders spread out, trying to give themselves clear shots without hitting each other. Felix knew he could not take all three, but he did not need to take all three. He just needed to survive long enough. He shot the woman first. She twisted in her saddle at the last second, and his arrow caught her strider instead of her. The beast reared, throwing her. Felix was already moving, dropping the bow and pulling his axe free. The other two riders charged. Felix threw himself to the side as the first strider thundered past, its rider slashing downward with a curved sword. The blade missed by inches. Felix swung his axe in a wide arc and felt it bite into the strider's hind leg. The creature screamed and stumbled. The second rider was on him before he could recover. A sword blade rang against his axe handle, the impact nearly jarring the weapon from his hands. Felix roared and shoved back, his superior strength and size forcing the strider backward. He brought the axe around in a brutal overhand chop that split the rider's wooden shield in half and sent him crashing from his mount. But the woman he had unhorsed was back on her feet, drawing her own blade. She was fast, faster than anyone Felix had fought before. She came at him in a whirlwind of steel, her sword a blur of motion. Felix blocked, parried, gave ground. She was trying to get him away from the cave entrance. A new voice cut through the chaos, clear and commanding despite the violence surrounding them. "Duck!" Felix obeyed instinctively, every fiber of his being responding to that tone of absolute authority. He dropped to one knee without hesitation, without questioning. An arrow whistled over his head close enough that he felt the wind of its passage, heard the distinctive hum of a well-fletched shaft cutting through air. The projectile took the woman in the throat with surgical precision. She collapsed, her sword clattering on the stones, hands clutching uselessly at the arrow embedded deep in her neck. Felix spun around. Standing at the cave mouth was another Ardenite. This one an adult woman who commanded attention in a way the twins never had. Her skin was a deeper blue than the children, almost navy, the color of deep ocean water or twilight sky. She stood perhaps 5.5 feet tall, lean and muscular in the way of those who had spent years training their bodies for combat. But what caught Felix's attention immediately were the intricate tattoos that covered her face and bare arms. They were not decorative markings, but something more, patterns that seemed to shimmer and shift in the light as if they had a life of their own. Spirals and geometric shapes, lines that connected and diverged in ways that made Felix's eyes want to follow their paths. She held a bow carved from what looked like a single piece of dark wood, another arrow already nocked and ready. Her movements were fluid and confident, the posture of someone who had grown up with a weapon in her hands. She wore simple fighting leathers, scarred and patched from obvious use, and a short sword hung at her belt. Her silver hair was pulled back in a tight braid that hung to the middle of her back. Her eyes met his across the blood-stained stones of the ravine, and Felix felt something he had not felt in 3 years of isolation. Recognition. Not of familiarity, but of a kindred spirit. This was someone who understood violence, who had walked through fire and come out the other side still standing. "You fight well for a tree chopper," she said. Her voice was rich and warm despite the death surrounding them, carrying an undertone of amusement. "You shoot well for someone who just appeared out of nowhere," Felix replied, getting to his feet. His muscles screamed in protest. He had taken more hits than he had realized in the fury of combat. "Where did you come from?" "I have been tracking these collectors for 2 days," she said, lowering her bow slightly but not fully. She was still assessing him, Felix realized, trying to determine if he was friend or foe. "I sensed the twins pass through this area yesterday morning and knew they were fleeing something terrible. When I heard the sounds of battle, I came to investigate." She looked at him with those strange, large eyes, then nodded slowly. "You are not what I expected." "I get that a lot. Who are you?" "My name is Alvinisa. I am a path seeker of the resistance." She gestured toward the cave. "And I believe you have something that belongs to all of us." Inside the cave, Clelly and Dorothy hugged each other, wide-eyed at the violence they had just witnessed. Felix cleaned his axe on some moss, while Alvinisa knelt beside the twins, checking them for injuries beyond the scratch on Clelly's face. "Thank you for protecting them," Alvinisa said softly. "These children are precious to us." "They said something about their blood," Felix said, "that corporations want it." Alvinisa's expression hardened. "It is worse than they know. Ardenite blood contains compounds that can extend life. Not forever, but decades beyond the natural span. The collectors work for off-world cartels who sell it to the wealthy. But the extraction process is fatal. They drain the children slowly, keeping them alive as long as possible to maximize the yield." Felix felt sick. "That's why they're hunting these two specifically?" "Twins are especially valuable. Their blood is more potent." Alvinisa stood, her hand resting on the sword at her belt. "The resistance has been trying to protect our people, but we are few and poorly armed. The collectors have superior weapons and numbers." "And you just happen to be nearby?" She smiled slightly. "The forest speaks to those who listen." "I felt a disturbance, a wrongness. So I followed it and found you defending our young." Dorothy tugged on Felix's sleeve. "Will you help us?" "Please?" Alvinisa is strong, but even she cannot fight all the collectors alone. Felix looked at the 3 Ardenites. He had come to this world to escape exactly this kind of entanglement, to avoid caring about causes and crusades. But looking into those trusting eyes, both the children's and Alvinisa's, he knew he had already made his choice the moment he let Clelly and Dorothy into his cabin. "Show me where this resistance of yours is hiding," he said. "We need to come up with a plan." The journey to the resistance camp took them deeper into the forest than Felix had ever ventured. In 3 years of living on Ardon, he had explored perhaps a tenth of the wilderness surrounding his cabin, always staying within a day's walk of home. Now they plunged into territory that was truly alien, where the trees grew so tall their tops disappeared into a permanent canopy of violet-tinged leaves, where the underbrush was thick enough to hide entire villages, where streams ran with water that sparkled with mineral content that made them look like flowing jewels. Alvinisa led the way with absolute confidence, navigating by signs invisible to Felix's human eyes. She would pause occasionally and examine a particular tree, running her fingers over bark that looked no different from any other tree to Felix. Or she would kneel and touch the ground, feeling for something he could not sense. Sometimes she would close her eyes and simply stand still for long moments, her head tilted as if listening to sounds beyond the range of human hearing. When Felix asked about it the first time, she smiled mysteriously. The forest speaks to those who know how to listen. It remembers those who pass through it. Everything leaves a trace, a signature in the life energy that flows through all living things. That sounds like magic, Felix said skeptically. It is not magic, Alvanisa insisted, her tone taking on the patient quality of someone who had explained this many times before. It is sensitivity, like how some of your people can taste differences in water that others cannot, or hear sounds at frequencies most miss. My bloodline has always had this gift. We feel the pulse of life around us, the forest's mood, the health of the trees, the passage of others through this space. She paused and placed her hand on a massive tree trunk. Her tattoos, which had been dim and barely visible, suddenly flared with soft blue light that pulsed in rhythm with something Felix could not perceive. The light spread from her hand into the bark itself, running through the wood in veins of luminescence that branched out like blood vessels. This tree is old, she said softly. It has stood here for over 800 cycles. It has seen the first Ardenite colonists arrive on this world. It remembers when this forest was much smaller, before we learned to help it grow. And it knows that 6 people passed by here less than a day ago, moving quickly, heading south. Felix stared at the glowing patterns in the tree bark. The collectors. Yes, they are spreading out, searching, but they do not know these paths as we do. They crash through like blind beasts, leaving wounds in the forest that take seasons to heal. She removed her hand and the light faded. Come. We should keep moving. It is still several hours to sanctuary, and we do not want to travel these paths after dark. Why not? Because the predators of this forest hunt at night, and even Ardenites fear them. They continued walking, the twins staying close to Felix despite Alvanisa's friendly presence. Dorothy held his hand, her small fingers gripping tightly as if afraid he might disappear if she let go. Claylee walked on his other side, her eyes constantly scanning the forest around them with the wariness of prey that knows it is being hunted. The forest grew stranger as they traveled deeper. Bioluminescent mushrooms grew in patches on the trees, their pale green light visible even in daylight. Flowers bloomed in impossible colors, purples so deep they were almost black, reds that seemed to glow from within. Once they passed a clearing where massive bones lay half buried in the moss and undergrowth. Felix could not identify what creature they had belonged to, but the skull alone was larger than his entire cabin had been. Sky whale, Alvanisa said when she saw him staring. They fly in the upper atmosphere, feeding on cloud formations. Sometimes they descend too low and cannot regain altitude. This one must have fallen decades ago. Flying whales, Felix muttered. Of course this planet has flying whales. Despite the strangeness of their surroundings, or perhaps because of it, Felix found himself relaxing into the journey. There was something almost meditative about walking through this alien wilderness, letting Alvanisa guide them while he simply observed and absorbed. The sounds of the forest were a constant symphony, bird calls that sounded like bells, insect songs that harmonized in complex patterns, the rustle of small creatures in the undergrowth. Occasionally she would pause and place her hand on a tree trunk, and her tattoos would glow faintly in response. When Felix asked about it, she explained that she could sense the life force of the planet itself, read its moods and warnings. It was not magic, she insisted, but a sensitivity that ran in certain bloodlines of her people. Some Ardenites could feel the weather days before it changed. Others could sense minerals deep underground. Her particular gift was reading the forest memory, seeing who and what had passed through. They traveled through the day, stopping only briefly to rest and eat. Felix noticed how the forest seemed to respond to Alvanisa's presence. Vines drew back from her path. Thorn bushes bent away. Once a massive predator with 6 legs and rows of teeth emerged from the undergrowth, but when it saw Alvanisa, it simply turned and melted back into the shadows. That beast could have torn all of us apart, Felix observed. The forest knows its protectors, Alvanisa said, and it knows those who mean it harm. As the violet sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange, they reached what looked like solid cliff face. Alvanisa pressed her hand against the rock, and her tattoos flared bright. A section of the stone groaned and swung inward, revealing a passage. "Welcome to Sanctuary," she said. Felix had to duck to enter the tunnel, his head nearly brushing the low ceiling even when he hunched his shoulders. It sloped downward at a gentle angle, lit by bioluminescent fungi growing on the walls in patterns that seemed almost deliberately placed. The light they gave off was a soft blue-green, just bright enough to see by. The air was cool and smelled of minerals and earth, with an underlying sweetness that Felix could not identify. After several minutes of descent, his knees protesting the awkward angle, the tunnel opened into a vast underground cavern that took his breath away. Felix stopped and stared, unable to comprehend what he was seeing at first. The cavern was enormous, its ceiling lost in shadow far above. Natural pillars of stone supported it, worn smooth by millennia of water flow. But it was not empty. Hundreds of Ardenites lived here, their blue skin glowing softly in the fungal light like living gems scattered across the cavern floor. There were dwellings carved into the rock walls, creating a honeycomb pattern that rose up the sides of the cavern in tiers. Each dwelling had been smoothed and shaped with incredible precision, the stone carved with flowing designs that seemed to grow organically from the rock itself. Gardens grew in carefully tended plots of soil that had been brought down and enriched over years. Strange vegetables with bioluminescent leaves grew in neat rows, tended by Ardenite farmers who sang as they worked. The songs echoed through the cavern in complex harmonies that made Felix's chest ache with their beauty. A small stream flowed through the center of the space, its source a waterfall that cascaded down the far wall in a silvery curtain. The water was crystal clear, and Felix could see fish swimming in it, their scales reflecting the ambient light in rainbow patterns. Children played near the water's edge under the watchful eyes of their parents. Their laughter was high and musical, so different from human children, but conveying the same joy. Elderly Ardenites sat in groups, their deeply colored skin marking them as the elders of this community. They wove baskets from some kind of flexible reed, their hands moving with the practiced ease of those who had perfected their craft over decades. Workshops were built into some of the larger chambers, and Felix could hear the ring of hammer on metal, the rasp of saw on wood. Somewhere deeper in the cavern, someone was playing a stringed instrument, the melody winding through the space like a living thing. The smell of cooking food drifted through the air, making Felix's stomach rumble. He had not eaten since the previous night. It was a hidden city, a sanctuary indeed. A complete community had built itself in this impossible place, hidden from the predations of the collectors and the outside world. It was beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time, because Felix understood immediately that no one chose to live underground unless the surface had become too dangerous. Their arrival caused immediate commotion. Ardenites stopped what they were doing to stare at the massive human in their midst. Felix was aware that he was easily 2 feet taller than the tallest Ardenite, and probably outweighed any 3 of them combined. His size, which had seemed merely large among humans, was genuinely giant here. Children pointed with open curiosity, their fear of strangers not yet developed. Adults drew back, hands moving toward weapons. A few of the warriors positioned themselves protectively in front of the children. Felix could see the calculation in their eyes, assessing whether this huge stranger represented a threat. The twins pressed close to Felix's legs, suddenly shy despite being among their own people. Or perhaps because of it. They had been through trauma, had seen their entire village taken. That kind of experience changed how you related to the world. An elderly Ardenite approached, his movements slow but steady despite his obvious age. He leaned on a staff carved with intricate symbols that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. His skin was such a deep blue it was almost black, the color of the deepest ocean trenches on Earth. His silver hair hung to his waist in a thick braid, decorated with small beads of polished stone. When he spoke, his voice carried authority that silenced the crowd immediately. "Alvinisa, you bring a human to our sanctuary? I bring the one who saved the twins, Elder Torin. The one who fought the collectors and won." Torin studied Felix with eyes that seemed to look right through him. Then, to Felix's surprise, the old Ardenite reached out and placed a weathered hand over Felix's heart. Felix felt a strange warmth spread through his chest. After a long moment, Torin stepped back and nodded. "This one's heart beats with purpose again. It has been silent for too long, but now it wakes." He turned to address the crowd. This human is no enemy. His spirit is that of a protector, though he has tried to bury it. We will give him shelter. The tension in the cavern eased. Ardenites returned to their tasks, though many still cast curious glances at the giant among them. Clelly and Dorothy ran off to find their friends, their earlier terror already beginning to fade with the resilience of children. Torin led Felix and Alvanisa to a chamber carved high in the cavern wall. You may rest here, he said to Felix. We will speak more in the morning about what comes next. When the elder had gone, closing the carved wooden door behind him with a soft click, Felix slumped onto the sleeping mat provided. It was far too small for his frame, woven from some kind of plant fiber that was surprisingly soft. His feet hung off the end, and his shoulders were too wide for it. But after the day's exertions, fighting for his life, and walking for hours through alien wilderness, he barely noticed. Every muscle in his body ached. The wound on his side throbbed with each heartbeat. He could feel bruises forming where blows had landed during the fight in the ravine. Alvanisa sat beside him, close enough that he could feel the coolness of her skin, smell the faint scent that clung to her. It was like forest flowers and rain, clean and natural. Her presence both comforted and unsettled him in ways he could not quite name. It had been 3 years since he had shared space with anyone, let alone a woman. 3 years since he had allowed himself to care about another person beyond the transactional relationships of trading furs for supplies. You do not have to stay, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. In the silence of the small chamber, cut off from the sounds of sanctuary beyond the thick stone walls, it seemed too loud. You have done more than anyone could ask. The twins are safe now. The resistance knows about the collector movements. You could return to your cabin, your solitude, rebuild what was destroyed and go back to the life you chose. Felix thought about that. Really thought about it. He thought about the quiet mornings chopping wood, the sun rising over the violet forest, the simple satisfaction of building something with his own hands. He thought about answering to no one, having no responsibilities beyond keeping himself fed and sheltered. That life had been peaceful in its way. Empty perhaps, but peaceful. But he also thought about the riders coming for those children, about Clelly's terrified face as she described her village being taken. He thought about the screams that would come if the collectors succeeded in their harvest, children being slowly drained of their blood while corporations counted their profits. He thought about Cornelia's cold smile and the casual way she had discussed administering a genocide. And he thought about Alvanisa, about the way she had appeared when he needed help most, the way she moved through the forest like she was part of it, the way her tattoos glowed when she touched the trees, the way she had looked at him across blood-stained stones and seen not a stranger, but someone who understood what it meant to fight for something larger than yourself. My cabin is probably destroyed by now, he said finally. The collectors do not seem like the type to leave loose ends. And even if it is not, they know where I live now. They will come back. Maybe not today or tomorrow, but eventually. They will want revenge for the ones I killed. Then what will you do? Her amber eyes searched his face, looking for something he was not sure he could give. He looked at her, really looked at her, the tattoos on her face and arms that seemed to shift and move in the low light, the strength in her posture even when sitting at rest, the intelligence in her eyes and the compassion that softened the hard edges of a warrior's face, the way her silver hair had come loose from its braid and fell around her shoulders in waves. I am going to help you fight them, he said. The decision felt right, settling into his chest with a weight that was somehow comforting. But not by hiding down here hoping they give up. We need to go on the offensive. We need to hit them where it hurts and keep hitting them until they decide Ardan is not worth the cost. Alvanisa's eyes widened slightly, surprise and something that might have been hope flickering across her face. The collectors are many, and they have weapons we cannot match. They have resources, organization, backing from off-world corporations with deep pockets and no conscience. They have superior equipment, Felix corrected, his military training asserting itself. He had been in this position before, advising resistance movements on how to fight against better-armed opponents. The tactics were universal, whether you were fighting on Earth or an alien world. That is not the same as being unbeatable. Superior equipment makes you confident. Confidence makes you careless. I know tactics. I know how to turn strengths into weaknesses, how to make an enemy's advantages work against them. And I know where they will not expect an attack. Where? Their base camp. Their supply lines. They are hunting across a wide territory, which means they are stretched thin. Small groups spread out over hundreds of square miles of forest. We hit them where it hurts, take their supplies, force them to consolidate their forces to protect their resources. Then we hit them again before they can regroup. We make them react to us instead of us reacting to them. Alvanisa leaned forward, her eyes intense and focused. Felix could see her mind working, processing his words, weighing them against her own knowledge of the situation. This is not the thinking of a simple woodcutter. This is the thinking of someone who has done this before. Many times. I was not always a woodcutter. Felix met her gaze steadily. He rarely talked about his past, had come to Ardon specifically to escape it. But something about this woman made him want to be honest. I was a soldier, a good one. I led strike teams against superior forces in hostile territory. We won more often than we lost. But I got tired of following orders that put profit over people, that sacrificed the innocent for the sake of political expedience. That is why I came here, to get away from all of it, to stop being responsible for other people's lives and deaths. And yet here you are, planning war. There was no judgment in her tone, only understanding tinged with something that might have been sadness. Here I am, Felix agreed. A wry smile touched his lips. Because apparently I cannot help myself. I see children in danger and my brain starts making tactical assessments. I see injustice and my hands start reaching for weapons. I thought I could bury that part of myself, but maybe some things are too deep to dig out. She smiled then, the first genuine smile he had seen from her since they met. It transformed her face, made her look younger and less burdened by the weight of responsibility. Then we will fight together. And perhaps when this is over and the collectors are driven from our world, you can teach me about chopping wood and building cabins. I think I would like that. I think I would like to learn how to create things instead of always destroying them. Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary, and Felix felt something stir in his chest. Something he had thought dead and buried alongside his old life. It was frightening and exhilarating at the same time. He had not felt this way since before the war, before he had seen too much death and learned that caring about people only led to loss. Alvanisa reached out and touched his hand where it rested on his knee. Her fingers were cool and slender, but he could feel the calluses from bowstrings and sword grips. A warrior's hand. Her tattoos suddenly blazed with light bright enough to make him squint. Blue radiance that filled the small chamber and cast dancing shadows on the walls. She gasped and pulled back, staring at her own hand as if it had betrayed her. That has never happened before. Never with anyone. What does it mean? I do not know. She looked at her tattoos, watching them slowly fade back to their normal dim glow. The tattoos respond to life force, to compatibility of spirit between two beings. They glow when I am near family, warm slightly when I meet someone I will become friends with. But this intensity, this brightness, I have only heard of it in old stories. Tales of perfect bonds, connections that transcend the normal limits of our understanding. I am not even Ardonite, Felix pointed out, though his heart was racing. How can we have that kind of connection? I do not know, she repeated. She looked up at him, her amber eyes searching his face. But I know what I feel. I know that when I saw you fighting those collectors, something in me recognized you. Not as a stranger, but as someone I had been waiting to meet. Does that sound crazy? Maybe, Felix admitted. But I felt it too, in the ravine. Like I knew you, even though we had never met. Before he could say anything more, she leaned in and kissed him. It was brief, almost tentative, a question rather than a statement. Her lips were soft and cool against his, and Felix felt like he had been struck by lightning. Energy coursed through his body, making every nerve ending sing. When she pulled back, her eyes were wide with wonder and something that looked like fear. I think, she said softly, her voice shaking slightly, that you were meant to come to Ardon, and I was meant to find you. I think this was always going to happen, even if neither of us knew it. Felix wanted to say something profound, something worthy of the moment, but words failed him. Instead, he cupped her face in his large hands, feeling how delicate her bone structure was compared to human women, marveling at the softness of her skin. He pulled her close and kissed her again, deeper this time, pouring 3 years of loneliness and isolation into that kiss. She responded with equal intensity, her cool hands finding the back of his neck, fingers tangling in his hair. The tattoos continued to glow, bathing them both in gentle blue light. They fell asleep that way, wrapped around each other on the too small mat, while the sanctuary buzzed with quiet life around them. Morning came with a summons from Elder Torn. Felix and Alvinisa found him in a large chamber that served as a meeting hall. Several other Ardenites were already there, including a scarred warrior named Marin, who led the resistance fighters. Marin did not look pleased to see Felix. "We should not trust the human," he said bluntly. "His kind came to our world and brought the collectors with them." "The collectors are not my kind," Felix said calmly. "They are criminals exploiting your people for profit. On any world, in any species, you will find such scum." "Pretty words, but you are still human. And you are still alive because this human saved 2 of your children yesterday," Alvanisa snapped. "Show some respect, Marin." Torin raised a hand for silence. "Enough. We face an enemy who grows bolder each day. They have taken 3 villages in the past month. Our people live in fear, hiding in caves while our homes burn. We cannot continue like this." Felix stepped forward. "Then let me help you change that. I propose we attack the collector's main camp." The chamber erupted in protest. Marine looked at him like he had lost his mind. Even Alvanisa seemed shocked. "That is suicide," Marin said. "They have hundreds of warriors, fortifications, supplies. We would be slaughtered." "Not if we do it right," Felix said. He looked around the chamber, meeting each pair of eyes. "I am not suggesting a frontal assault. I am suggesting sabotage, hit-and-run attacks, disruption of their supply lines. Make them afraid. Make them look over their shoulders. Force them to spread their forces thin, trying to protect everything, and then hit the gaps." Torn studied him thoughtfully. "You have done this before. Many times, against opponents who outgunned and outnumbered us. We won by being smarter and more determined." "And what do you need from us?" Felix considered. "First, I need to know the terrain. Every path, every river, every place that could serve as an ambush point. Second, I need to know your fighters. Who is best with a bow, who can move silently, who can track. Third, I need supplies. We cannot fight with what we have. We need weapons, and I know where to get them." Alvanisa frowned. "Where?" "My cabin. Before I came to Ardon, I buried a cache of weapons nearby. Military-grade bows, arrows with steel heads, swords, spears, armor. Enough to outfit 50 fighters. I never dug it up because I hoped I would never need it." "If your cabin is destroyed, the collectors may have found the cache," Marin pointed out. "Possible, but unlikely. It is well hidden, and they would need to dig in the right spot. It is worth checking." Torin nodded slowly. "Very well. Alvanisa, take a squad and escort Felix back to his cabin. Retrieve what you can. Marin, begin gathering our fighters and assessing their skills. We will prepare for war." The meeting broke up with Ardenites hurrying off to their assigned tasks. Felix found himself swept up in the organized chaos of a people preparing to fight back. It felt familiar and terrible all at once. Alvinisa gathered 5 warriors for the journey back to Felix's cabin. They were all veterans, their bodies scarred from previous encounters with the collectors. They moved through the forest like ghosts, utterly silent despite the speed of their passage. Felix did his best to keep up, his larger frame crashing through undergrowth that the Ardenites simply glided past. It took them most of the day to reach the cabin, approaching cautiously from downwind. What Felix saw made his jaw clench. His home was a ruin. The walls had been torn down, the roof collapsed. Everything he had built over 3 years of solitary labor was reduced to scattered timber and ash. But what made him truly angry was the figure standing in the wreckage. The creature was unlike anything Felix had seen before. It stood on 2 legs like an Ardenite or human, but its head was wrong. The skull was elongated, the eyes multifaceted like an insect's, and mandibles clicked where a mouth should be. It wore armor made of overlapping plates that looked like chitin, but rang like metal when struck. This was Briner, the commander of the collectors in this region. Briner was directing other collectors as they loaded crates onto crude wooden carts pulled by striders. Even from a distance, Felix could see what was in those crates. His weapons cache. They had found it. Alvanisa placed a hand on his arm, feeling the tension in his muscles. "We cannot fight them all," she whispered. "There are too many." She was right. Felix counted at least 20 collectors, all armed and armored. He and his 6 companions would be overwhelmed in moments. But watching his weapons being carted away, weapons that could have given the resistance a fighting chance, made him want to do something reckless. Instead, he forced himself to breathe slowly and think. "We follow them," he said quietly. "See where they take the weapons. Then we plan how to get them back." They shadowed the collector convoy through the forest, staying well back and using every scrap of cover. The collectors were not careless, but they clearly did not expect pursuit. They followed a rough trail that led northeast, away from Sanctuary. As the sun began to set, the convoy reached a cleared area beside a wide river. Here stood the collectors' main camp, and it was larger than Felix had feared. At least 100 warriors, maybe more. They had fortified the camp with wooden walls and watchtowers. Cages lined one side of the compound, and Felix could see Ardenite prisoners huddled inside them. Children mostly, though there were some adults as well. His hands clenched into fists. Alvanisa touched his shoulder again, a gesture of understanding and shared anger. "We cannot attack that directly," one of the warriors, a lean male named Drake, said. "It is a fortress." Felix studied the camp layout, his military training automatically cataloging weak points and vulnerabilities. No fortress is perfect. They get their water from the river, their watchtowers are wooden and will burn, and they are overconfident because no one has seriously challenged them before. "What are you thinking?" Alvanisa asked. "I am thinking we need to hurt them, make them afraid, show them that hunting Ardenites has a cost." He pointed to a bend in the river upstream from the camp. "There. That is where we start." The Ardenite warriors looked at him with a mixture of hope and skepticism. Felix turned to face them all. "I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" Alvanisa nodded immediately. After a moment, the others did as well. Even skeptical Marin, who had joined them on the trail, gave a grudging nod. "Good. Then here is what we are going to do." The attack came at dawn, when the collectors were at their least alert. Felix had divided his small force into 3 teams. Team 1, led by Drake, positioned themselves upstream with bundles of dry grass and fallen branches. Team 2, under Marin's command, circled around to the far side of the camp. And Team 3, just Felix and Alvanisa, waited at the river bend. The signal was a bird call, perfectly mimicked by Drake. Immediately, his team began dumping their combustible materials into the river. The current was swift here, carrying the debris downstream toward the camp. As the first bundles floated past Felix's position, he and Alvanisa sent fire arrows arcing through the pre-dawn darkness. The burning grass ignited instantly, creating a floating wall of flame that raced toward the collector camp. Shouts of alarm rose as the fire reached the wooden water wheels the collectors used to draw water from the river. Those wheels were crucial for the camp's survival in this remote location. They began to burn. While the collectors rushed to save their water supply, Marin's team struck from the opposite direction. Arrows rained down on the watchtowers, forcing the sentries to take cover. One tower, its base already weakened by rot, collapsed entirely when Drake's archers hit it with concentrated fire. Chaos erupted in the camp. Collectors ran in every direction, some trying to fight fires, others rushing to defensive positions. In the confusion, they failed to notice the real target of the attack until it was too late. Felix and Alvanisa had circled back around to the prisoner cages. The guards had abandoned their posts to fight the fires. Felix's axe made short work of the cage locks. Ardenite prisoners spilled out, blinking in confusion. "Run!" Felix shouted at them. "North into the forest. The resistance will find you." Most fled immediately. A few were too weak or too traumatized to move. Alvanisa gathered these, supporting them with strong arms. One child, barely older than the twins, clung to her leg and refused to let go. That was when Briner emerged from the smoke and chaos. The insectoid commander took in the scene with a sweep of his multifaceted eyes, and his mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter. Clever, he said, his voice a chittering rasp, but ultimately futile. He raised a hand and blew on a strange whistle. Immediately, collectors began converging on their position from all directions. Felix counted 10, then 15, then too many to count. They had walked into a trap. "Go!" Felix roared at Alvanisa. "Get them out of here!" "Not without you. I will hold them as long as I can. You have to get those prisoners to safety." For a moment, Alvanisa hesitated. Torn between duty and what Felix could see in her glowing eyes was something much deeper. Then she kissed him hard, fast, and pulled away. "Do not die, human. I have not finished with you yet." She gathered the freed prisoners and sprinted for the tree line. Felix turned to face the converging collectors, his axe ready. This was going to hurt. The first collector came at him with a spear. Felix sidestepped the thrust and brought his axe down on the shaft, splintering it. His follow-through caught the collector in the chest, sending him sprawling. But there was no time to finish him. Two more were already attacking. Felix fought like a cornered bear, using his size and strength to brutal effect. His axe was a blur of motion, blocking, striking, always moving. A sword rang against the axe head. Felix twisted and drove the back spike into a collector's helmet, feeling it crunch through chitin and bone. He kicked another in the chest, sending him flying backward into two more. But there were too many. A club caught him across the shoulders, nearly driving him to his knees. A sword opened a gash on his arm. He was bleeding, slowing. They were going to overwhelm him through sheer numbers. That was when the war cry split the air. Alvanisa burst back into the clearing, her sword blazing with reflected firelight. Behind her came the other resistance fighters, and behind them, impossibly, were the freed prisoners. They had armed themselves with stones, with broken branches, with anything they could find. They crashed into the collectors like a wave. The battle became a furious melee. Felix found himself fighting back-to-back with Alvanisa, their movements complementing each other as if they had trained together for years. She was fast where he was strong, precise where he was brutal. Together they carved a path through the collectors. But Briner was not finished. The insectoid commander waded into the fight, wielding a wicked curved blade in each hand. He was terrifyingly fast, his strikes coming from impossible angles. He cut down two Ardenite fighters before anyone could stop him. Felix threw himself at the creature, swinging his axe with all his strength. Briner blocked with one blade and slashed with the other. Felix felt the sword bite into his side, a line of fire across his ribs. He ignored it and headbutted Briner, his thick skull crashing into the insectoid's face. Briner staggered back, ichor leaking from his mandibles. "You will die here, human," Briner hissed. "Maybe," Felix said, "but you are coming with me." They circled each other, weapons ready. The battle raged around them, but they were focused only on each other. Briner struck first, a whirlwind of blades. Felix blocked and parried, giving ground, looking for an opening. There. Briner overextended on a thrust. Felix caught the blade with his axe handle and twisted, wrenching the weapon from Briner's grasp. Before the collector could recover, Felix drove forward, slamming his shoulder into Briner's chest with the full weight of his massive frame behind it. They went down together, rolling across the ground. Briner's remaining blade flashed toward Felix's throat. Felix caught the creature's wrist, holding the sword back through sheer strength. They were locked together, Briner's alien face mere inches from his own. Then Alvanisa was there, her sword punching through Briner's back and erupting from his chest. The collector commander spasmed once and went still. Felix shoved the body aside and staggered to his feet. Around them, the collectors were breaking. With their commander dead and their camp in ruins, they fled into the forest. The freed prisoners and resistance fighters let out a ragged cheer, but Felix could only lean on Alvanisa as the adrenaline faded and the pain of his wounds crashed over him. "That was the stupidest thing you have ever done," he gasped. "Coming back?" "I learned it from you," Alvanisa said, though she was supporting most of his weight now. "Besides, I told you I was not finished with you." They had won the day, but Felix knew it was only the beginning. The collectors would send reinforcements. They would come with more warriors, more weapons. This was far from over. But as he looked at the freed prisoners embracing their rescuers, at the resistance fighters standing tall with pride in their eyes, at Alvanisa smiling despite the blood and smoke covering her, he felt something he had not felt in 3 years. He felt like he had a purpose again. The journey back to Sanctuary took 3 days because of the wounded and the slow pace of the freed prisoners. Felix's injuries were cleaned and bandaged by an Ardenite healer who tutted disapprovingly at his scars. The cut on his side required stitching, and the healer informed him tartly that humans healed far slower than Ardenites. "I will try to do better next time," Felix said, which earned him a sharp look but the hint of a smile. The attack on the collector camp had yielded mixed results. They had freed 37 prisoners and dealt the collectors a serious blow, but they had not recovered the weapons cache, and several resistance fighters had died in the battle. Marin was among the wounded, a deep gash across his thigh that would take weeks to heal. When they finally reached Sanctuary, the entire underground city came out to greet them. The sight of the freed prisoners caused celebration and tears in equal measure. Families reunited. Children ran to parents they thought they would never see again. In the midst of the joy, Felix felt like an outsider, a reminder that he was not truly part of this community. But then Clelly and Dorothy came running through the crowd and threw themselves at him, nearly knocking him over despite his size. "You came back," Dorothy cried. "We were so worried." "Of course I came back," Felix said, awkwardly patting their heads. "I promised I would keep you safe." Elder Torn approached with his staff tapping on the stone floor. "You have done well, Felix of Earth. You have given our people hope, but I fear the hardest battles still lie ahead." "The collectors will retaliate," Felix agreed, "and they will come with everything they have." That night, the War Council met in the Great Chamber. Torrin presided, with Marin on his left despite his injuries and Alvanisa on his right. Felix stood with the other fighters, but Torrin gestured for him to come forward. "Speak, Felix. You have proven yourself a warrior and a tactician. What do you counsel?" Felix looked around at the assembled Ardenites. "We have to keep hitting them. Not give them time to recover or regroup. We raid their supply lines, ambush their patrols, make them afraid to venture into the forest. We turn their strength into a weakness by forcing them to defend everything and concentrate on nothing." "A war of attrition," Marin said. "We do not have the numbers for that. We do not need numbers if we fight smart. The forest is on our side. We know this terrain better than they ever will. We use that advantage." An older warrior spoke up. "And when they bring in reinforcements from off-world? When they bring weapons we cannot match?" Felix had no good answer for that. The truth was that primitive weapons could only take them so far against a determined enemy with superior resources. But before he could say as much, Alvanisa stood. "Then we make sure the cost of those reinforcements is too high," she said. "We do not just fight the collectors here. We make their crimes known. We send word to the colonial authorities, to the trade guilds, to anyone who will listen. If the collectors are operating illegally, there may be forces who would shut them down." "The authorities do not care about us," someone said bitterly. "Maybe not," Alvanisa admitted, "but they care about profit and stability. If we make Arden too costly to exploit, they will abandon the collectors." Torrin nodded slowly. "You speak wisdom, Alvanisa. Felix, can this be done?" "It can be tried," Felix said, "but we need proof, evidence of what the collectors are doing, witnesses, documentation if possible." "Some of the freed prisoners were forced to work in the collector's blood extraction facility," Marin said. "They can testify to what they saw." "Good. Record their testimonies. Draw maps of the facility. Every detail we can use." Felix felt the familiar weight of command settling on his shoulders, a burden he had sworn never to carry again. "And we keep fighting, keep them off balance, make them more concerned with survival than profit." The council continued long into the night, planning raids and ambushes, discussing supply routes and fallback positions. By the time it ended, Felix was exhausted both from his wounds and the weight of responsibility. He limped to the chamber he had been given, wanting only to sleep. Alvanisa was waiting for him. She had cleaned the blood and smoke from her skin and changed into a simple robe of white cloth. Her tattoos glowed softly in the fungal light, casting dancing shadows on the walls. She looked at his bandaged torso and frowned. "You should be resting." "I will. Just need to sit down for a moment. He lowered himself carefully onto the sleeping mat, trying not to tear his stitches. Alvinisa sat beside him, her cool hand touching his forehead. You have a fever. Probably just my body fighting off infection. I will be fine in a day or two. She did not look convinced, but she let it go. Instead, she leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the distant sounds of sanctuary settling down for the night. I have been thinking, Alvinisa said finally, about what happens when this is over. If we survive, you mean? When we survive, she corrected firmly. I have been thinking about your cabin, about rebuilding it. Felix felt something tighten in his chest. It is just a cabin. No, it is your home, your sanctuary, just like this place is ours. You built it with your own hands and the collectors destroyed it. That was not right. Nothing about this situation is right. No, she agreed, but that is why we fight, to make things right again. She pulled back enough to look at him, her large eyes searching his face. When this is over, I want to help you rebuild. If you will have me. Felix stared at her, caught off guard. You would leave Sanctuary? Your people? I would spend my days with someone I care for, building something good in a world that has seen too much destruction. My people will still be here. I can visit, but I think you and we could build something together. The tattoos on her arms flared brighter as she spoke, responding to the emotion in her voice. Felix reached out and traced one of the patterns with his finger, feeling the warmth beneath. I would like that, he said softly. Very much. She smiled and kissed him, gentle and sweet. When she pulled away, she stood and held out her hand. Then let us make sure we both survive to see it happen, starting with you getting proper rest. She helped him lie down, fussing over his bandages and blankets until he caught her hand and pulled her down beside him. They lay together in the darkness, her cool skin against his fevered warmth. And for the first time since arriving on Ardon, Felix felt like he had found where he belonged. The next morning brought grim news. A resistance scout had returned with word that a massive collector force was gathering to the east. Hundreds of warriors, all converging on a single point. They were preparing for a major operation. They are going to attack Sanctuary, Marin said, his face pale despite his blue skin. They know where we are. Or they are trying to draw us out, Felix countered, make us panic and do something stupid. But Torin shook his head. No, I have felt a disturbance in the forest energies. Something probes at the edges of our home, searching. They may not know the exact location, but they are close. The council erupted in panicked discussion. Some argued for evacuation, others for fortifying Sanctuary's defenses. Felix let them argue for several minutes before standing. Enough, Ray, he said, his deep voice cutting through the noise. We do not run, and we do not hide. We go on the offensive. Against hundreds? Someone objected. That is suicide. No, it is strategy. Felix looked around the chamber, meeting each skeptical gaze. They expect us to be afraid, to scatter or hole up defensively. We do the opposite. We strike at them first, hard and fast, before they can organize properly. We hit their supply train, kill their scouts, and make them so busy defending themselves that they forget about attacking us. Alvinisa stood beside him. Felix is right. We have been reacting to their moves since this began. It is time we made them react to ours. Marin struggled to his feet despite his wounded leg. I may not like the human, but he knows war. I say we listen to him. One by one, the other warriors nodded agreement. Torin tapped his staff on the floor. Very well. Felix, you will lead this attack. Choose your warriors and make your plans. But remember, the survival of our people rests on this gamble. No pressure, Felix thought. But aloud he said, we will not fail you. The next hours were a blur of preparation. Felix selected 30 of the best resistance fighters, prioritizing those who could move quietly and shoot accurately. He had them blacken their faces with charcoal and wrap their weapons to prevent any glint of metal giving away their position. They would strike at night using darkness and surprise as their primary weapons. Alvinisa insisted on coming despite Felix's protests. I am the best tracker we have, she pointed out, and my connection to the forest will let me sense danger before it finds us. You need me." She was right, of course. Felix stopped arguing and instead focused on the plan. They would split into 3 groups, each targeting different parts of the collector's supply line. Maximum disruption, minimum risk. Hit and fade before the enemy could respond. As the sun set and the violet sky darkened to black, the raiders gathered at Sanctuary's hidden entrance. Clelly and Dorothy came to see them off, pressing small carved stones into Felix's hands. "For luck," Clelly said solemnly. "So you will come back to us." Felix knelt down, ignoring the pull of his stitches. "I will come back, I promise." "And you will bring Alvanisa too?" "Her especially." The girls seemed satisfied with that and ran off to join the other children, watching from a safe distance. Felix tucked the stones into his pocket and rose to find Alvanisa studying him with an unreadable expression. "You care for them," she said. "They remind me why we are doing this." They moved out into the night, traveling single file through the dark forest. Alvanisa led, her glowing tattoos dimmed to barely visible flickers. She navigated with perfect confidence, occasionally pausing to place her hand on a tree trunk, as if listening to something Felix could not hear. After several hours of travel, she raised a fist. The column halted. Felix crept forward to join her at the front. She pointed ahead where firelight flickered through the trees. A collector camp. Smaller than the main base they had raided before, this was clearly a forward position. Felix counted perhaps 20 warriors and several carts loaded with supplies. Perfect. He signaled for the groups to split up. Drake took 10 warriors to circle around to the far side of the camp. Marin, stubbornly insisting he could still fight despite his leg, led another 10 to cut off any escape route to the east. That left Felix and Alvanisa with 10 warriors to strike from the west. They waited until Drake signaled that he was in position. Then Felix gave the order with a simple hand gesture. Arrows flew from the darkness, cutting down the sentries before they could raise an alarm. Felix led the charge into the camp, his axe splitting a collector's shield before the creature even knew he was under attack. All around him, Ardenites fought with the fury of those defending their homes and children. The battle was brief and brutal. The collectors, caught completely by surprise, managed only token resistance. Those who tried to flee ran straight into Marin's ambush. Within minutes, it was over. 20 collectors dead, their supplies captured, and not a single resistance casualty. But as Felix surveyed the carnage, he felt uneasy. It had been too easy. These collectors had been poorly prepared, almost like they were expecting to operate without any resistance at all. "This was a supply camp for a much larger force," Alvanisa said, echoing his thoughts. "They would not leave it so lightly guarded unless the main force is already on the move," Felix finished. "We need to get back to Sanctuary. Now." They loaded what supplies they could carry and torched the rest. But as they prepared to move out, one of the scouts came running back with terror on her face. "Lights!" she gasped. "Hundreds of them! Moving through the forest towards Sanctuary!" Felix cursed. The collectors had not been preparing for a future attack. They were already here, probably had been moving into position, while Felix led the best fighters out on this raid. He had fallen for a diversion. "Run!" he roared. "Everyone back to Sanctuary as fast as you can!" They abandoned stealth for speed, crashing through the undergrowth with desperate haste. But they were miles away, and Felix knew with sinking certainty that they would not make it in time. The collectors would reach Sanctuary first, unless someone slowed them down. Felix grabbed Alvanisa's arm, pulling her to a stop even as the other fighters raced past. "Take them back, get everyone into the deepest chambers, and prepare for a siege." "What are you going to do?" "Buy you time." He pulled her close, kissing her hard. "Remember what we talked about, rebuilding the cabin, together." "Felix, no. You cannot fight them all alone." "I do not have to fight them all. I just have to delay them long enough for you to get ready." He pushed her gently toward the retreating warriors. "Go, please." For a moment, Alvanisa stood frozen, her tattoos blazing so bright they lit up the forest around them. Then she turned and ran, her footsteps fading into the darkness. Felix turned back toward the approaching lights. He could hear them now, hundreds of feet marching through the forest, the jangle of weapons and armor, an entire army coming to wipe out the last free Ardenites. He found a narrow ravine where the path squeezed between 2 cliff faces. Perfect choke point. Felix set to work with frantic speed, using his axe to cut down saplings and wedge them across the ravine entrance. Not enough to stop the collectors, but enough to slow them, force them to bunch up. He gathered loose rocks and stacked them at the top of the cliff, pulled vines across the path at ankle height, set up every crude trap and obstacle his tired mind could devise. It would not be enough. He knew that, but it might buy an extra hour, and an hour could make the difference between survival and extinction for the people in Sanctuary. The first collectors appeared as torches bobbing in the darkness. Felix stood in the center of the ravine, axe in both hands, and waited. Let them see him. Let them know someone stood in their way. The collectors stopped, surprised to find a single human blocking their path. Then they laughed. One human against hundreds. It would take them seconds to sweep him aside. But they had not reckoned with what a desperate, determined, absolutely furious human could do. The first wave charged. Felix's axe sang through the air, taking the lead collector in the chest. He yanked the weapon free and swung again, feeling it bite deep into another collector's shoulder. They pressed in from both sides, but the narrow ravine limited how many could attack at once. Felix used that, positioning himself so they could only come at him 3 at a time. His axe became a whirlwind of death. Block, strike, turn, swing. A collector tried to stab him with a spear. Felix caught the shaft, pulled the warrior off balance, and headbutted him. Another came with a sword. Felix ducked under the swing and drove his axe into the collector's knee, sending him down screaming. But there were so many. A club caught Felix on the shoulder, numbing his arm. A sword opened a cut across his cheek. He was bleeding from a dozen wounds now, his strength fading. Still he fought, because every second he held this ravine was another second for Sanctuary to prepare. A massive collector, taller even than Felix, forced his way through the crowd. He carried a 2-handed warhammer and swung it with devastating force. Felix barely got his axe up in time. The impact sent shockwaves up his arms and drove him back several steps. The giant collector pressed forward, hammer swinging again and again. Felix blocked and parried, giving ground with each blow. His axe handle was cracking under the impacts. One more hit like that, and the weapon would shatter. The hammer came down. Felix stepped aside at the last instant and let it smash into the ground. While the collector struggled to free the embedded weapon, Felix swung his axe with all his remaining strength and took the creature's head clean off. But the delay had been costly. More collectors poured into the ravine surrounding him. Felix backed against the cliff wall, axe ready, preparing for the final stand. Then the rocks he had piled on the cliff top came raining down. Not from his doing, but from above. Felix looked up in shock to see Ardanite fighters on the cliff edge, dropping stones and firing arrows down into the pack collectors below. And leading them, her tattoos blazing like stars, was Alvanisa. "Did you really think I would leave you?" she shouted down to him. Felix wanted to yell at her for not following orders, but he was too busy grinning like an idiot while fighting for his life. The rockfall had thrown the collectors into confusion. Felix seized the moment, rallying his strength for one final push. He charged into their ranks, axe swinging, and the Ardanites above gave covering fire. Together they held the ravine for another precious 10 minutes before Felix finally had to signal a retreat. The collectors were simply too numerous, but those 10 minutes had been enough. As Felix and the fighters climbed the cliff using ropes Alvanisa had lowered, he could see collector torches spreading out through the forest, searching for alternate routes to Sanctuary. They would find none. The Ardanites knew every path, every game trail. They could lead the collectors on a wild chase through the wilderness while Sanctuary prepared its final defenses. By the time Felix and the fighters made it back, the entire underground city had transformed into a fortress. The entrance had been sealed with massive stone blocks that could only be moved from inside. Every able-bodied Ardanite stood ready with whatever weapons they could find. Even the elderly and the children held stones or clubs. Felix collapsed against the wall, utterly exhausted. Alvanisa was beside him immediately, checking his wounds with expert hands. "You are bleeding again," she said. "Your stitches tore." "Worth it?" "You absolute fool. You could have died. But I did not. We bought them time. That is what matters." She looked at him with eyes that were equal parts fury and affection, then pulled him into a fierce kiss. Around them, Ardenites cheered and whistled. When she finally released him, Felix's head was spinning for reasons that had nothing to do with blood loss. "When this is over," Alvanisa said firmly, "you and I are going to have a very long talk about not throwing your life away needlessly." "Looking forward to it," Felix managed to say before the healer arrived and shooed Alvanisa away so he could work on patching up the battered human. For 3 days, the collectors laid siege to Sanctuary. They tried to find alternate entrances, attempted to dig through the stone, even tried to smoke out the inhabitants by lighting fires at the sealed entrance. Nothing worked. The Ardenites had chosen their sanctuary well. It was impregnable as long as they had supplies. But supplies were the problem. With hundreds of refugees from captured villages, Sanctuary's food stores were depleting rapidly. Water was not an issue thanks to the underground stream, but food would run out within a week at most. Felix knew they could not afford a prolonged siege. They needed to break out or force the collectors to withdraw, and there was only one way to do that. "We need to destroy their leadership," he told the War Council on the third night of the siege. "Cut off the head and the body dies." "Briner is already dead," Marin pointed out. "Briner commanded the regional forces, but someone above him organized this army. Someone is coordinating the siege from their main camp. We kill that person, and the collector organization in this region collapses." "How do you propose we get to their camp?" Torin asked. "We are trapped here." Felix smiled grimly. "The same way I got in here. Through tunnels they do not know exist." He explained his plan. The underground river that fed Sanctuary connected to a larger waterway that eventually surfaced several miles from here. A team could swim downstream through the submerged passages, emerge behind collector lines, and strike at their command center. "That is insane," someone said. "Those passages are flooded. We would drown." "Ardenites can hold their breath longer than humans," Felix said. "And I survived worse during my military training. It can be done." Alvanisa stood. "I volunteer." "No," Felix said immediately. "Yes, I know those waterways. I have swum them before when seeking meditation in the deep places. I can guide a team through." Felix wanted to argue, but he knew she was right. Without a guide familiar with the underwater maze, anyone attempting it would likely die lost in the darkness. "Fine, but I am coming with you." "Of course you are," she said with a slight smile. "Did you think I would let you miss all the fun?" They selected 5 other volunteers, all strong swimmers and fierce fighters. The plan was simple. Get to the command center, kill whoever was in charge, and get out before the entire collector army realized what had happened. Simple, but not easy. They entered the water at midnight, each carrying weapons sealed in waterproof hide bags. The current was strong, pulling them downstream into darkness. Felix took a deep breath and submerged. The next several minutes were among the most terrifying of Felix's life. Swimming through pitch-black water, feeling the stone walls press close on all sides, his lungs burning with the need for air. Just when he thought he could not hold his breath any longer, Alvanisa's hand found his in the darkness and squeezed. Somehow that gave him the strength to keep swimming. They surfaced in a hidden grotto, gasping for air. Everyone had made it through. They quickly unsealed their weapons and crept to the grotto entrance. Outside, the night forest awaited. Using skills honed over weeks of raids, they moved like ghosts through the collector-infested woods. Sentries died silently, throats cut or arrows through hearts. The team left no survivors, no chance for alarms. The command center was a large fortified tent in the heart of the collector camp. Felix could see figures moving inside, backlit by lanterns. He signaled the team to spread out and prepare. Then everything went wrong. A collector patrol stumbled onto them, returning from a scouting run. There was a moment of frozen surprise on both sides. Then the collector opened his mouth to yell. Alvanisa's arrow took him in the throat, but it was too late. His death rattle had been loud enough. Shouts of alarm rose across the camp. Torches flared to life. The team was surrounded. "Into the tent!" Felix roared. "Now!" They burst into the command center, weapons ready. Inside, Felix saw a figure he recognized despite having never met them before. Sitting at a map-covered table was an elegantly dressed human woman with cold eyes and colder smile. "Well," she said calmly, despite armed warriors bursting in, "this is unexpected. I am Cornelia, administrator of the harvest operation. And you must be the troublesome human I have heard so much about. Felix leveled his axe at her. Call off your forces, leave Arden, and never come back. She laughed. Or what? You kill me. There are a dozen administrators. My death changes nothing. She gestured around her. Besides, you are surrounded. My guards will be here in seconds. Then we all die together, Felix said, starting with you. Before Cornelia could respond, the tent flap exploded inward, and collectors poured in. The command center became a killing floor. Felix swung his axe in wide arcs, trying to protect Alvanisa, while she fired arrows point-blank into collector faces. The other Ardenites fought like demons, their backs to the tent center. Felix saw one of their team go down, then another. They were being overwhelmed. In desperation, he grabbed one of the lanterns and hurled it at the tent wall. The oil-soaked fabric caught fire instantly. Out, he roared. Through the fire! They burst through the burning tent wall into chaos. The fire was spreading, setting other tents ablaze. Collectors ran in every direction, some trying to fight the flames, others searching for the saboteurs. In the confusion, Felix and what remained of his team ran for the forest. Arrows flew after them. Felix felt one graze his leg but kept running. They crashed into the tree line and kept going, the sounds of pursuit growing louder behind them. The river! Alvanisa gasped. We have to get back to the river. But more collectors were emerging from the forest ahead of them, cutting off that route. They were trapped between two forces, caught in a closing vice. Then Felix heard it, a sound he had hoped never to hear again. The battle cry of Ardenites, hundreds of voices rising as one. The refugees and fighters of Sanctuary had sallied out, breaking the siege to save their comrades. They crashed into the collector rear like an avalanche, Torin himself leading the charge with his staff crackling with blue light. The collectors, caught between the attackers from Sanctuary and the fires in their camp, broke and ran. The tide of battle had turned completely. Felix and his team linked up with the Sanctuary forces. Alvanisa was bleeding from multiple wounds but still fighting, her sword red with ichor. Felix fought beside her, his axe rising and falling with mechanical efficiency. The battle raged through the night. By dawn, the collector camp was a smoking ruin, and their army scattered into the wilderness. Cornelia had escaped in the chaos, but her operation was destroyed. The harvest was over. Felix stood among the ruins, leaning on his axe, watching the sun rise over Arden's strange violet sky. Alvanisa leaned against him, both too exhausted to do more than simply exist in this moment of victory. Is it over? She asked quietly. For now, Felix said. They will send someone to investigate eventually. But it will take time, and when they do come, they will find evidence of what happened here. The freed prisoners have already started spreading the word through the colony networks. The collector's crimes will become public knowledge. And us? Felix looked down at her, at this fierce warrior woman who had stolen his heart despite all his efforts to remain detached. I think we have earned some peace. Time to rebuild that cabin. She smiled, her tattoos glowing softly in the dawn light. I would like that very much. 3 months later, a new cabin stood where the old one had been. It was larger than before, built with Ardenite craftsmanship and human engineering. Blue bark logs fitted together seamlessly, with a stone chimney that drew perfectly and windows that let in the violet sunlight. Felix stood in the doorway, axe in hand, watching Clelly and Dorothy play in the garden. The twins had asked to stay with him and Alvanisa, their own families lost to the collectors. Felix had agreed immediately. The cabin had felt too empty without their laughter. Alvanisa emerged from the forest carrying a basket of the strange blue fruit that grew in this region. She saw Felix watching the children and smiled. They need more firewood for cooking, she said. Then I suppose I should get to work, Felix said. He kissed her, a long, slow kiss that still made her tattoos glow, then hefted his axe and walked to the woodpile. As he raised the axe and brought it down with that familiar, satisfying crack, splitting the log cleanly in two, Felix realized something. He had come to Arden seeking solitude, seeking to escape from caring and connection. Instead, he had found family, purpose, love. The forest around him was alive with alien birdsong. The violet sky stretched overhead. His children played in the garden while the woman he loved prepared their meal. And Felix, the solitary woodsman, The warrior without a cause had finally found his home. The axe came down again, splitting another log. Behind him, Dorothy called out, asking if he wanted to see the flower she had found. Felix set down his axe and turned to her with a smile. "Show me," he said, and as the sun set over Ardan, painting the sky in impossible colors, the former Marine who had sought only to be alone found himself surrounded by the greatest treasure he had never known he was seeking. A family, a home, a reason to wake each morning and face whatever challenges the day might bring. The collectors would eventually return, Felix knew. There would be more battles, more struggles, but that was tomorrow's problem. Today he had firewood to chop, children to tend, and a woman to love. Today he had everything he needed. The axe came down one more time, and the sound echoed through the forest like a heartbeat. Steady, strong, alive.